Oh my god, you are so stupid.
If you had a brain, you'd be dangerous.
Look at you. You're disgusting. Nobody will ever want you.
Why can't you just do something good for a change?
You're useless.
You're good for nothing.
You're nothing without
I
me.
wish I had never had you.
If you had a brain, you'd be
The
dangerous.
world would be a
Look at
better
you.
place
You're
without
disgusting.
you.
I wish you were dead.
The honeymoon phase and love bombing are two phrases used when regarding abuse. The honeymoon phase is mentioned in the cycle of abuse wheel. The love bombing phase is often used when talking about narcissists or sociopaths. In my opinion, the two are very similar, and so I will speak about both. Love bombing is one of the traits used by narcissists and sociopaths, who are probably the worst kind of emotional abusers out there, when they first meet their potential victim. And for the victim, it can be extremely exhilarating, exciting, and fantastic. The abuser, in this case, will shower the victim with all sorts of compliments, gifts, and make them feel like they are the most amazing person in the whole entire universe. Within only a few short weeks or even days, the abuser can have the victim convinced that they are soulmates. Phrases that a lot of abusers will use during the love bombing phase can sound a lot like, "You are the air I breathe, the ground I walk on. You are the first thing on my mind when I wake up and the last thing I think of before I go to sleep. You are on my mind all the time. I need to be around you all the time." The love bombing phase, however, is also the time when the abuser gets to know their victim and begins to store information in their mind, filing it away for what can be used against them later on in the future when the relationship starts to turn sour. During this phase, the abuser will use their incredible charm to get the victim to talk about themselves, what their fears are, what makes them self-conscious, what annoys them, etc., etc. And in turn, to gain the victim's trust, the abuser will usually mirror what the victim tells them and say that they too have the same fears and are annoyed by the same things. Unfortunately, none of this is true. The victim is on such a high by meeting this wonderful person who makes them feel so wonderful that they have no idea that they are being manipulated. When the victim is finally hooked, the relationship usually starts to go south. Unfortunately for the victim, the person they knew during the love bombing phase is the person they remember and fell in love with. And although they begin to feel insecure about the abuser and even question their sincerity, it's the love bombing phase that gets them hooked and keeps them hooked. Narcissists and sociopaths will only come into a victim's life because the victim has something they want. This makes the victim their source of supply. The source of supply can be many things: money or financial gain, living arrangements, sex, public attention, or even to use the victim to somehow get back at another person. And that is what happened to me a few years back when I dated a man very briefly named Cameron. Before dating, Cameron and I already knew each other as we hung out in the same circles. Cameron got involved in a project working alongside my older brother and two other people. However, something happened that Cameron didn't like, and he quit the project, and things did not end well between Cameron and the others, including my brother. And that is when Cameron contacted me. I should mention here that the red flags were all there, even with that first phone call, but I was so naive and so desperate to be liked that I dismissed them all. And I will share why that was in another video about narcissistic mothers. By contacting me, Cameron had an agenda, and it was obviously to get back at my brother who he had felt had wronged him. Next thing I know, Cameron was asking me out for drinks, then dinner, and then before I knew it, I was being love bombed. And I will admit it was a lot of fun. We laughed so much and I loved being around Cameron, and I thought he loved being around me. But sadly, that just wasn't the case. I am willing to accept that he probably didn't even like me, but I was a source of supply to gain vengeance on my brother. The relationship only lasted about 3 months, and when Cameron felt he had succeeded in coming between my brother and I, and had hurt my brother in some sick and twisted way, he ended the relationship. And of course, it was all my fault. It was a whirlwind of a romance. I was swept off my feet and then dragged through the mud. He even launched a smear campaign against me on his Facebook. Once again, a story for another video. It took me a good 2 years to recover from those few short months, and in those 2 years, Cameron went on to date God knows how many other women, each one he used, I'm sure, as a source of supply. And when he got what he wanted, he spit them out too and made them feel as though they were to blame, like they were nothing. I was just one of many. How many of you listening to my story can relate? One thing that I would also like to mention is that the love bombing phase is not just used in intimate relationships. Friends, family, co-workers can also be a source of supply to these people. If you have something they want, or they want to use you against another person like Cameron did to me, they will use love bombing to manipulate you, no matter what role you play in their life. The honeymoon phase is a little bit different, simply because it is used to describe the cycles of abuse, but it is also used by narcissists and sociopaths, as they too follow the same patterns. The honeymoon phase, also known as the reconciliation phase, almost always follows after a violent outburst from the abuser. This outburst can be physical or verbal. Either way, it leaves the victim extremely upset. The abuser may feel guilt about their actions, but in most cases, it is meant to manipulate the victim once again to regain control over them. The abuser will beg for forgiveness, cry, buy gifts for the victim, promise to never behave that way again. They may even agree to go for counseling or attend anger management. They may also try to minimize the abuse by telling the victim it wasn't as bad as what they thought it was. Or they may say things like, "You are too good for me," or "I don't deserve you." In drastic cases, they may even threaten to kill themselves if the victim leaves. In the case of a narcissist or a sociopath, however, the honeymoon phase may not sound like what was mentioned before. In the case of a narcissist or a sociopath, they tend to see no wrongdoing in their behavior, or they will outright blame the victim for how they behaved. However, narcissists and sociopaths are master manipulators, and they may apologize, but it will be forced and it will sound insincere. Unfortunately, in all cases of an abusive relationship, the abuser has no intention of getting better. And as time goes on, the honeymoon phase begins to diminish, and the tension building phase begins again. It's called the cycle of abuse for a reason. The honeymoon phase is also the reason I believe why so many victims stay with their abuser. It's like love bombing all over again. The victim sees their abuser acting in such a way and believes it is because they must really love them. The relationship becomes fun again, and the victim feels loved. Sadly, it's all a lie. It's a manipulation tactic, and nothing more. Domestic abuse is not just physical abuse. The 6 key components of domestic abuse are verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, financial, and spiritual. If you believe you may be a victim of domestic abuse, there is help out there for you. Please visit the web to find shelters or support agencies in your area. You are not alone, and you can break the cycle of abuse.